Morning all, I'm Evie Vernon O'Brien, Jamaican by birth, British by naturalization. And it is my delight to welcome the Revd Dr Michael Clarke. Now, you have a nice whole biography here, but what I want to emphasize is that Michael is a passionate theological educator. And he comes, there's a lovely little thing that says, Codrington College's links with Uspg go back to its foundations in the 18th century. And I'm sure Michael is going to talk about that. Hello? There was a beautiful project. Christopher Codrington said, we need to educate people in theology in the West Indies. We must do this. Let us build a college. But a college must have a proper financial foundation. So I'm going to give you 2 working plantations run with enslaved Africans. So this wonderful society for the propagation of the gospel accepted the gift of people in chains. So Michael is sitting on that peculiar heritage that the church, you do things in one way for a good cause, but you do bad things with it. And how we, as the inheritors, live with that. Sometimes we say in the Caribbean that people became Christians in spite of the Christians and not because of the Christians. I invite Michael.
Good morning. First of all, let me say that it's a joy and a pleasure to be here to share with you today. And if I may offer some perspectives before we get going, I couldn't help this morning as I walked into this cathedral thinking to myself, wow, Barbados could fit in here. But then Duncan reminded me of another statement I made yesterday, where I said, Barbados built Liverpool. And that's historical fact. So the little island that can fit in here, this cathedral, built this area. Good morning. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to address you and to have a conversation this morning regarding mission in the world. It is clear that most of the world has taken this word mission and redefined it many times over to suit their particular purposes. Nonetheless, the word remains a central part of our language and has its own unique meaning in our context. At the same time, we are now in a place where we will be forced to redefine this word so that it demonstrates that as a church, we are mindful of all the developments and issues surrounding the ministry we seek to deliver in the world. Speaking out of a Caribbean context, mission in its early days mostly meant support for education, church planting, and medical services. In Barbados, the Uspg, as it was called at the time, was responsible for the first primary school for enslaved children on the society plantation. The society would also have provided clergy for the various islands over time, thus ensuring that the church survived. It would also have contributed to numerous projects identified by local churches through their respective dioceses. I am present today because the Society would have stayed with its commitment to the will of Sir Christopher Codrington III, requesting that a convenient number of professors and scholars maintained there, all of them to be under the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, who shall be obliged to study and practice physic and treasury, as well as divinity, that by the apparent usefulness of the former to all mankind, they may both endear themselves to the people and have the better opportunities of doing good to men's souls whilst taking care of their bodies. End of quote. This request saw not only the establishment of the first primary school, but also a secondary school in 1745, along with a tertiary institute named the Royal Institute, after one of its principals, and a theological college, Codrington College. Regional in nature, this work has contributed significantly to the Caribbean and continues to ensure that the region is well-equipped and staffed with well-trained clergy and laity. In those early days, the Society would have held responsibility for the 2 estates of Codrington and the 300 slaves, thereby ensuring the survival of the college and ensuring its ability to resource the province. This task was repatriated to Barbados, and an Act of Parliament established the Codrington Trust. The latter has now taken full responsibility for the properties and the college. The church in the Caribbean, therefore, is very much on its own. It's on its own as it seeks to navigate the waters of modernity and the end of colonialism, holding the tradition of Anglicanism as received with very little evidence of innovations, has not proven beneficial to the church in the West Indies. As the Church of England moved ahead on its continual path of evolution and reform, albeit with its own issues, the church in the Caribbean has stayed attached to the past. This attitude has been detrimental to the church in the region and continues to plague it as numbers dwindle and membership is aged. The inability to keep its youth beyond their confirmation speaks definitively to the church's lack of relevance in an age and a region where innovation, entrepreneurship, and indigenization are the order of the day and are being encouraged and supported by local agencies. A church, therefore, that is not sensitive to these areas is in danger of becoming an anachronism. One may wonder why this has occurred in a place where there is a regional theological college with graduates not only from that institution, but from around the world. My thesis is that it has to do with the introduction of blacks to the church in the 17th century. The church, which in most cases refused blacks access in its early days, when it finally opened its doors to them, the impression given was that this was superior to anything that they knew before. It was even felt that it was beyond their comprehension. Hence, in some instances, the thought was that one should not teach the faith to the slave as a requirement for baptism because she was incapable of receiving the teaching. In some ways, this sense of a disvalued self, a term coined by Professor Courtwright Davis, seems to have been riveted in the psyche of the black community, and hence the continuous looking to the external world for whatever it needs. Given that nothing local is of any significant value, religion then, a very central component of the black person, must come only from outside and be not touched in any form, lest it be reduced to nothing by the locals. The rise of the Caribbean Conference of Churches and the Black Power movement in the early 70s saw some semblance of challenge, but this was short-lived and quickly went dormant. The powers that be on the outside termed that the Conference of Churches was communist, and in those days, when that term was used, everyone ran and hid. So this failed attempt continues to haunt the region and is perhaps responsible for the lack of focus in this area of ministry. Any look at mission in the region must begin with an intentional effort to reinvent the church, providing it not only with a Caribbean face, but a Caribbean heart as well. In many of the islands, development is taking place at a reasonable pace, and with the assistance of various agencies occasionally shared across the region, the major areas of human endeavor are being modernized to ensure that persons experience a higher quality of life. The church, therefore, is once again tasked with what the apostles face, being the way. Free of all the colonial baggage that rendered it the state church, with all that entails. In this regard, the aspect of human existence that comes to the fore is spirituality. Spirituality, even within the context of the Old and New Testament, are seen as intricately linked to nature. Nature being a synonym for the life of a people, how they love, how they produce, how they mourn, etc. All of this is grounded in the people's journey. The Caribbean peoples who have embraced the church are in many ways disconnected from this experience. Times of worship, unlike their ancestral tradition, have been moments of being lifted out of one's circumstance and placed in a special place for a time. Formal worship and daily life were separated, one from the other, perpetuating the sense of separation in the world. This fitted squarely with their experience of being the inferior class people, not allowed to share in the life of the whites. Even in the church, they were relegated to the rear, not being able to purchase a pew to the front or anywhere else for that matter. There's a little story that is told in the historical pages of Barbados with respect to the rental of church pews. I think you're aware of the rental of church pews. Hello? Oh, good. All right. And the story goes this way. After some time in slavery, some persons were able to purchase their freedom. And more often than not, these were the colored folks, persons who were a combination between the European and the African. And so, because they had gotten their freedom, they were able to have businesses, and with businesses, they wanted to be recognized as not being slaves. And one of the ways to be recognized as not being a slave is to have the ability to purchase or to rent a pew in church. And so, on a particular occasion, it seems that the cathedral had run out of all the rental pews on the ground floor. And in the balcony, the slaves would be in attendance of church. So the powers that be in the cathedral decided that they would allow the coloreds to rent pews upstairs. The coloreds got very angry and they petitioned Parliament, objecting to having a rental pew upstairs. The reason being, when folks in the cathedral looked up and saw blacks, they couldn't tell who had rented pews and who were slaves. Self-hate is a serious thing. Having therefore finally inherited this prize, it has then been a challenge to tamper in any ways with this structure that we call church, either its form or its expression. One example is in the refusal to change from hymns, ancient and modern, the 1662 version, which you would have left behind so many decades ago. This text, up until the first decade of the 21st century, was still in use in the church in the province of the West Indies, even though it was no longer in print in the UK. The situation continued until 2010, when the publication of a new hymn book emerged. Very little was changed. They took all those hymns, added a few Caribbean hymns, and we now have a new hymnal. But at least it really now is hymns ancient and modern. Could the work of mission today be the undoing of this error? Activists in the region have challenged institutions to apologize for their part in slavery and to make reparations. Money is often demanded. However, what of the self-hate and the destruction of spiritual sense of which the society and those it upheld were clueless? There is a diversity in nature that is unmistakable, and it results in the beauty and splendor of creation. Even the ways man benefits from nature can this be witnessed. No two plants have the same properties. Various plants are often required to be put together in order for them to be efficacious. Where then did we arrive at the notion that the divine intention was for sameness? The writer of the book Joel, in his 2nd chapter, 28th verse, envisions that a time is coming when, in the words of the divine, I will pour out my spirit on all people. I receive this not as an undertaking in the future, but as an already accomplished task, which lacks the awareness of those who are present to it. This suggests that even in the scriptures, man perceived a glimpse of a profound truth. God's Spirit is in all things, diverse and multifaceted as they are. The writer of the Acts of the Apostles, in viewing and experiencing the awakening of the apostles to this truth, identifies it as the last days when these things shall be realized. Yes, it is the last days. For the fullness of God is revealed when we are all consciously aware of who and what we are as divine beings having this human experience. The days of the empire are over. Whether that emperor was the Roman Emperor, the British Empire, or the Christian Empire. This thinking is separative and destructive. It does not celebrate humanity, but promotes ideologies and cultures over against each other. The early church opted to follow the example of the institution that gave it free passage and protected it. It fully molded itself over the years to that model and was successful in sustaining the model even when its progenitor disintegrated. During its years of protection, the church had the leisure to explore more and more deeply the teachings of the fathers, with those who perceived faith from a different perspective, otherwise called heretics, silence. The scholars proceeded to codify what the church believed. These codes, developed under the above conditions, shaped what would be considered the work of mission in the world. The codes would have informed what occurred at Cape Coast Castle, which would later be extended across the Atlantic Ocean during the period of the slave trade and beyond. It would be witnessed in the various missions it set up. An example being the mission, the Revd mission, which was started from Barbados by a white Barbadian cleric and a black lay reader originally from St. Kitts, but ministering in Barbados. For over 17 years, the latter, the lay reader, Reverend John Henry Duport, served the Uspg faithfully, but on various occasions when the white head of the mission died because of the environment, he was constantly overlooked and a new head again imported, albeit a person less qualified. Even when he finally became the head, his salary was less than his predecessors in the post. This hierarchical structure based on race was an integral part of the society and culture out of which mission was being undertaken. Rethinking mission in the 21st century. Rethinking mission in the 21st century context cannot be engaged in on its own. It must be looked at within the context of the broader understanding of religious faith and the invitation to make disciples in the culture in which these disciples are located. In the Caribbean, there is the additional context of the non-mission activity that has taken place through the church, which shaped these Caribbean peoples. Mission has, in some ways, over the years, carried an inherent component that assumed an attitude of superiority and exclusivity. There is no need to rehash the slavery experience in this presentation this morning. Many books and movies have been produced on this subject, yet in some ways, few have captured the totality of this experience. The role the Uspg played in this commercial endeavor is evident, as this too has been documented. What has not been documented is the lasting impact of these well-known enterprises. As we embrace a better, or let's say more enlightened understanding of the world, we must ask, how is our view of religion changing, or has it changed? We have inherited an exclusive model that is at times willing to destroy others in the name of one path or another. Is this what we really understand by religion and the work of making disciples, sharing faith? In the Christian context, mission is an undertaking every individual is called to embrace. If by mission our understanding is how we seek to journey with others so that they may become aware of the treasure hidden within, as St. Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians 4, 7 to 11, but we have this treasure in clay jars so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. The gospel speaks to the condition of being awake and alert. It speaks of letting your light shine and not hiding it. These images stress the need for the human family to awaken to their true divine self. Jesus speaks to this in his life among us. He manifested the divine self that is present within the human experience. In doing this, the invitation is sent out for the world to be awakened. We have tended in the past to use the term conversion. It might be more in keeping with the Savior to speak of awakening. We need to assist others in their awakening. Conversion speaks of coming over to a particular way of being in the world as dictated by the stronger or more equipped agency. Whereas awakening speaks to one seeing a bigger picture in one's own context, without the need to become something or someone else. This bigger picture is the awareness of divine love which undergirds our human existence. This quality manifests when we're able to get beyond the mind to let go and discover the more. In various native cultures, one witnesses the use of dance, drumming, chanting, or taking the body where it enables a state of trance and renders the brain powerless, thereby allowing that which is within to emerge. Brother Bede Griffith speaks to this when he recalls his experience with a stroke, following which, having accepted that death was inevitable, he lets go, only to be bathed, in his words, in immense love. His testimony speaks to come into that awareness of that which is within. Mission in the past has tended to focus on ignoring the cultural context and the light that is present in a community, preferring to replace all that a community has gleaned from its context over the years by what is the custom of the incoming mission body. What is mission for today? Can we value what others have received through their traditions without feeling the need to replace it? Does our approach to mission speak powerfully to our lack of understanding of the very gospel that we seek to share? Mission in the Caribbean must make reference to the ways in which the culture of the peoples has been ignored or anathematized over the centuries. Cultural studies must be an integral part of the program of mission formation. These studies would indeed have to begin with this rediscovering and reclaiming the meaning surrounding the practice of various ancient customs. Some of these have survived through time, while others might have been lost. As an initiative to understand the importance of this approach, in the week leading up to Ash Wednesday, one of the seminarians at Codrington College decided to visit Trinidad and Tobago, where they were fully into their carnival activities. His intention, as he told me as principal, was not to go and dance, but to have conversations with laity and clergy to gather an understanding of how this festival was perceived from within the faith community. On his return, he shared his amazement at the deep theological and religious significance of the event, which has come to be marketed as a big street party. Listening to the stories surrounding the festival, he recognized that there was a great deal more than is known. He commented in reference to the carnival, "One of the things which I observed while there was the notion of no separation of the sacred and the divine, even so as it relates to Christianity. If we believe in our hearts that the Holy Spirit dwells within us, and we are living tabernacles, and that Jesus never leaves us nor forsakes us, how can we look at the notion of carnival or any aspect of our lives as less than spiritually significant?" He was also able to discern that what may look to the outsider as nothing more than a party had within it spiritual and moral significance. He further shared, in San Fernando, where they celebrate the adjacent Carnival Festival, there is a strong Indian influence. And in the same manner by which they morally and spiritually sought a new leader for their tribes in days of old, they seek one to lead their bands for the carnival. There is a spiritual and moral grooming that takes place for the choice of such a person. End of quote. While this seminarian experience would seem to support the view that a lack of engagement through the years, as well as outright demonizing, has driven a wedge between the church and the self-aware communities. And the emerging self-aware communities, as inquiring minds seek to make the connection with their ancestral past. While in North America, persons are speaking of Gen Z or Generation Z and their formation by current technologies and the strategies needed to reach this generation, in the Caribbean, that task is further complicated by a growing sense of self-identity in opposition to the institutionalized disvaluing of self, perpetuated in the earlier years. A look at the modern Caribbean bears witness to the growing number of persons who are opting to use other African traditional religions and their spiritual technologies as their way of engaging the spiritual. Others are demonstrating this need for self-identity through various other means, including their choice of natural hairstyles, their manner of dress, and the adoption of African names for themselves and their children. The Rastafarian community of the 1980s would have contributed to this growing sense of self-awareness and self-valuing. This movement in many ways was given encouragement in the words of one of the Caribbean prophets, the late Robert Bob Nestor Marley, penning the lyrics. And as I walked in here this morning, I heard a part of those lyrics from his song, Redemption Song. The words are: emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. End of quote. These words rang true, and the sentiment was picked up by Professor Courtwright Davis, a Caribbean theologian, in his text, Emancipation Still Coming. Of the various denominations of Christianity in the Caribbean, Anglicanism especially has been identified with the colonial machinery and the cleverly crafted by the European colonizers' work of self-oppression. As a result, many have turned away from this religious movement. The idea of going out and seeing what God is doing and joining in, a phrase crafted by Archbishop Rowan Williams, must be the approach taken in this time if Anglicanism is to contribute in any meaningful way in the ages to come. The planter church must become the slave church, coming out to serve. This will mean a reinventing of the Anglican Church. The latter, while in its theological method best fits this current time, in its visual and actions speaks strongly of conservatism and the maintenance of a bygone age. The continual manifestation of the latter renders its voice intolerable in the very places where it needs to be heard the most. Areas such as in the midst of the poor and the underachievers who have opted out of society. While in its theology and execution of ministry, especially as it related to education, the church has worked among the less fortunate. At the same time, in its structure and general operation, it was viewed as the planter's church, primarily because it focused more on addressing the needs of those of higher social status, and at times was directly instructed by that group. The church, as stated by Dr. Courtwright Davis in his text, Emancipation Still Coming, says, the church has received respect to gain moral authority. It is yet to gain the moral authority it should have in the lives of the people, primarily because it has never been the people's church. That phase of its history is yet to begin. This is part of the legacy of Anglicanism. I would take it further and suggest that in addition to the acquisition of moral authority, it more especially needs to acquire spiritual authority. The latter would witness a church with an understanding that God is at the core of all beings wherever they are placed on this journey, and as such are children of God and must be acknowledged as brothers and sisters. This awareness would no doubt underscore the value of each self before God, and assist in restoring full human dignity in ways not borne witness to in the past by the church in the region. Mission in the Caribbean will need to be more embracing of this authority and more intentional in becoming the people's church. Over the years, a few of our visionaries have spoken about the importance of engaging Caribbean theology and practices. These areas are yet to be codified. It is a reality that the Caribbean tends to engage more in oral means of communicating and engaging in matters from calypso to cricket to politics to religion than in any written way. Theological discourse, therefore, while it may be occurring because of this preference, is virtually unavailable to a wider body. The methodology of mission in the past has been one which sought to raise blackness. I often remember a picture I would have seen in one of my English books as a child in primary school that in many ways sums up this experience. The image was one of a white woman sitting over a tub in which a little black boy was placed. And she was there, in my interpretation, seeking with a scrub to scrub the blackness off. The image has remained with me as that which describes the experience of the Caribbean peoples. If one was willing to shed all that defines oneself, then it was quite possible that one would be allowed into a place of privilege. Abandoned now to face a world that demands authenticity, the task is to reclaim that self from the deep, where in many instances it has hidden until this time. To be missional as a church, led by those of ebony grace, as some calls it. All that ebony grace represents must be celebrated, first in ourselves, and then with that self-acceptance, meet those who are lost right where they are. To facilitate mission in the Caribbean at this time, the following, therefore, will need to be explored. As a church led in education in its first stages, there's now a need for a new form of education as persons seek to reclaim the identity eroded through the same effort of education. Will the church be able to participate in this redress? Theological reflection on customs and practices of the various traditions will need to be undertaken and shared. Can the church of this time be brave enough to journey into these uncharted waters and speak to its constituent? A deliberate effort to discover and demonstrate what it would mean to be the people's church. The importance of creating a greater awareness of the divine presence in all people, and that God is manifested in all cultures and all contexts. Taking the time to underscore the sacramentality of life. And finally, mission-oriented training where practical theology is given equal weight to academic study. This must be at the core of any ministry formation. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.